Hey everybody, this is Dave. Here's Bob.
Ahoy hoy.
And we're going to talk about Star Trek Picard, Chapter 8, Episode 8, Surrender. So, last time, Bob, on Star Trek Picard, let's catch up. Vadic and her changelings took control of the Titan, and then Lore and Data were sort of duking it out for control over their new body, although Lore pretty much won most of the episode last week. The Rikers were unseen. And, of course, Frontier Day is coming up. Why, Bob? Because Frontier Day is always coming up.
That's right.
So we start this episode with a rules scene, which they really love to do. Vadic systematically disables the Titan system. Did you notice Vadic's a weirdo, but this was very poetic language. Like, let's start by taking their eyes and now take their ears and the very road ahead of them with nowhere left to run. You know, she's odd. So are her metaphors. And it actually winds up working out later. We'll talk about that when we get there. But it did sort of jump out at me because it was so, even for a person who's odd, this was particularly odd, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Just doing her villain thing, her, comedy routine.
Yep. Geordi disables Data Lore, I guess, which is what I'm going to call him for now. And we find out, I swear Vadic at the end of last episode talked about being merciful in what she was doing, but somewhere between when we ended last episode and began this one, she wasn't feeling very merciful. And there are changelings sort of running through the Titan, just gunning people down. Did that strike you as strange? I mean, I know she's a really bad guy, but I thought her thing was like, I'm actually being somewhat nice.
Yeah, it's always, I was kind of, I was trying to figure out, is she being too bad? And then I'm thinking to myself, well, wait, are you overthinking this? I mean, she is the bad guy person. Yeah, it just seemed kind of out of the people running down the hallway and getting mowed down with phaser fire. Not just, it's just like I said, Star Trek fan who doesn't like a lot of Star Trek, and I'm constantly calibrating in my head, like, how much do I like this? How much do I like that? It didn't quite seem like Star Trek to me, though.
Yeah, well, it's one of these things for me that maybe the close reading was sort of working against me, because that line about last look, first of all, she's a Looney Tune, so maybe I shouldn't take her line about being merciful at face value, but it stuck with me so much that I thought, like, I don't feel like we left the last episode gunning people down in hallways, and they didn't give us like the backstory about how those people were trying to sabotage her. It just looked like they were getting gunned down.
I mean, the changelings are basically just, vaporizing people on sight, shooting them in the head, stabbing them in the throat. So
they're not great people.
It's not really out of character.
Yep, you're right. I started thinking at this point, well, the bridge crew, she's got them lined up, and there was one or two people that I didn't recognize, and my Star Trek knowledge went like, oh, those are those modern day red shirts. Like, these people who I don't know are going to die, so I'm preparing for that. Then there's a scene where that's my note is genuinely, there's a new alien on the bridge, important, probably dying. So I was all
weird potato head looking person.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I started thinking about this time because we got to catch up with Jack and all of the other named good guys. And it occurred to me, not at all during the last episode and immediately during this episode, like if Jack can take over other people, I feel like that could be a way out of this situation. Like, I don't know, can he do it to changelings? And we see Jack. Did you play or did your kids play Super Mario Odyssey?
I think so.
Super Mario? That's not how that works.
It's me.
That's you. It's I thought about Super Mario Odyssey during these scenes because the conceit of Super Mario Odyssey is that Mario would throw his hat on other people and then take them over. And I think that's basically what Jack's doing without a hat,
But to be fair, it would be pretty sweet if he did have a hat.
I would love to see him in a hat, throwing it around to make it easier. His hat are his glowing eyes, I guess.
Hey, talking about Jack warging into other beings, taking them over. Were you getting any vibes during those moments?
Other than Super Mario Odyssey?
Yeah, were you getting any inklings when the camera was doing its sort of Jack's power POV thing?
I don't know. What should I get?
Do you want to save it for speculation, or should I just throw it out now?
Yeah, all right. Well, no, if it's good for speculation, yes.
All right, okay.
Yes. Okay. I know what you're going to say. We're going to save that. Yeah, I think I do.
All right.
We'll save it for speculation.
Okay.
So Vadic then addresses the crew again and invites Jack to the bridge. Attention, crew of the Federation starship USS Titan. This is your captain speaking. She says, "You are now without sight, without sound, without freedom of movement, and with a tap of my finger, without oxygen to breathe or gravity to stand. I can make the hulls boil or the crew mess snow with cold, or I can be on my way with Jack Crusher in tow. Consider that." So she's trying to get the crew to turn against Jack, which they have basically spent an entire series making the argument that crew is family. So that's not going to happen, right? Then we go to the Rikers on the Shrike. This is the first time that we have seen the Riker family together in this season. They appeared together a few seasons ago. We get a feisty Troy here. Is her name still Troy? I don't know. I don't care. I'm going to seamlessly refer to her as Troy and Deanna.
Deanna Troy Riker?
Throughout, yeah.
Deanna Riker Troy? I don't know.
She was feisty. Remember the video in Guinan's bar, which we haven't seen for a few episodes, by the way. A lot of restraint there.
That is weird. You're right. Maybe they had to take it apart.
They had to strike the set.
They had to strike the Shrike. Actually, somebody said that they had to. I heard that they had to take apart the ship from season 1 and 2. What was the name of that ship? It had I
don't remember.
Like a Spanish name or a French name, La Serena or something.
Oh yeah, that sounds right.
Is that it? Anyway, I think that they had to take it apart to turn it into the Shrike stuff in this episode. So you'll notice, I don't think we've seen that ship for several episodes now.
Huh. Well,
so maybe that's the same with the holodeck.
Wait, is that Rafi's ship? Is she on?
Yeah.
Right, and all of the stuff, we don't really see the cockpit. The cockpit? We don't really see the bridge of that ship. And I pointed out a bunch of times, we talked about it, where Rafi and Worf are on that, but they're standing in front of the stained glass windows part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there you go. That would make sense. This is the first, like I said, scene with this married couple where it's just them and not talking about anybody, or not interrupted, I guess, by anybody else. This is a feisty version of Troy. She was feisty on that video in Guinan's bar. Riker talks a lot about his transformation. Remember at the beginning of the season, he was super bummed out about losing his kid. and he's made a transformation, but his wife has not seen that until they were hanging out in prison. We learn that Deanna can't read changelings exactly, but then she seems to kind of read changelings because she knows that many changelings, including Vadic, have left the ship. I'm wondering at this point, is she a changeling? We talked about this in speculation corner segment last time, but the more I watched, the less that was a thing for me. They do seem like a couple who've been together for a long time and have their own shorthand, and I thought it was a fine scene. Kind of an intimidating one, I think, to write, because if you do, it's your responsibility to catch them up in their entire relationship, basically, on camera here.
Yeah.
And, Troy talks about how she can't, like I said, read changelings. She knew that they were imposters as soon as they arrived at her house. There's a lot of good little joking back and forth between the couple, but and Troy at one point asks if they did the right thing, giving them the compromised code. And that's what came up in the last episode. That's how they found out that the Rikers were on the Shrike. And Riker has an answer to that. They address it, which is the obvious answer, which is I couldn't let them torture you anymore. And by the way, we're sending it to Admiral Jean-Luc Picard. I'm sure he's got a classic Picard trap. As we speak, he's probably got her on the ropes. And then that is a classic.
He's got the grail already.
He's the classic dad, we're well out of range.
Yeah.
Line. You want to explain the dad, we're well out of range rule?
Well, it's just I always had problems with at the time the second two Indiana Jones sequels. I love Raiders like everybody loves Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I always sort of made fun of the endless stream of gags that are in Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom is a huge gross out.
Yeah,
and Last Crusade is just basically an overcorrection where it's just a series of nonstop gags. And yeah, probably the best example is Dad, we're well out of range, and then they immediately start blowing up the ground near them.
That's exactly it. So every time that happens, I think, oh, he's saying this so that we can show that he's wrong.
No, but the thing I said about Marcus probably has the Grail, like that's exactly what Indy did when he's telling the Nazis, like, Marcus already has a 2-day head. It's the exact scene.
It's another Indiana Jones thing.
Yeah, and then it just cuts to him like, does anybody speak English?
Yep, that's the one. So we go back to the Titan, where Shaw and Seven talk consequences. Vadic dispatches a team to find Jack. I'm not sure why they can't see Jack. I mean, maybe it's because they're turning off all of these systems and it doesn't allow them to a consequence of that. But like, that's a really like table stakes thing in Star Trek, is it not? Like, we're going to scan for life forms, but they can't seem to do that on the ship they've taken over. I don't get it. I'm not sure how huge of a scene, how huge of a theme this next thing is, but there's a little discussion between Seven and Shaw about consequences, like how everything has consequences. And Shaw is very much like, you should have blown up the turbolift instead of letting me and a bunch of changelings on the bridge. And she's not going to apologize because she saved his life. And essentially her position is, I made a choice to save you. We'll figure out a way after that. And he's like, you shouldn't have made that choice. So he's very hard, very sort of by the book. And this is a theme, I think, of the whole stinking series, which is, the theme is, it's easy to make a decision when somebody's anonymous. Like, you remember back at the beginning of this season, Shaw only turned around to get Jack because Picard said, he's my son.
Yeah.
Right? Like the idea sort of implied here, I think, is that a random person isn't necessarily worth saving, but the son of the man standing near you on the bridge is.
Yeah.
Vadic said last episode, that line we talked about, which was, I have it. How remarkable is it that an enlightened species can ignore each other's pain? Do you think she'd, as in Beverly, have kept your son from you if she could feel your loss? I think what there is a whole thing where if you make a nameless, faceless enemy or don't know a person, it's much harder to do. It's much easier to do something or dismiss them. Mm-hmm. So Shaw could make a decision when he didn't know who was on the Shrike, but he had to make another decision.
No, Picard, that's when the Shrike was trying to get Jack the first time off of the Titan.
Right. He just wanted to hand him over.
They were debating whether just to, hand him over to them or fight. Yeah.
Right. And it was easy for Shaw to go like, I don't know this guy. He seems like a jerk. He's done.
Yeah.
And Picard said, he's my son. And at that point, Jack became a person to him and he couldn't do anything about it. And Seven couldn't blow up the turbo lift because Shaw was on it. It was a person. She couldn't make that decision. I'm sure that there are more examples, but again, Shaw to me is like the clinical sort of by the book way of thinking. Riker did that actually when he said, at the time I thought it was pretty absurdly, that remember when they'd been sucked into the nebula and no one was coming and everybody knew that, and Riker was like, actually Starfleet protocol says that we should just wait it out. And I was like, what are you talking about? Nobody, but that was the same sort of idea, that clinical by the book way of thinking. And Seven, I guess, represents the broader themes of the show, which are generally about how personalizing things, friends, family, is sort of difficult in, I think, a lot of ways, but ultimately worth it.
Yeah, it's strange that, now that you say that, she is sort of oftentimes the heart of the show, which is strange considering that she was the Borg.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So Vadic's going to kill a crew member every 10 minutes. Bob, ticking clock until Jack turns himself over. This builds on that scene last episode between Jack and Picard, where Jack's basically like, just let me turn myself over. I'm not worth it. And of course, the crew members, his family leitmotif. And Picard's answer to Jack is that won't solve anything, turning you over, because Vadic's got a bigger plan, obviously. And like, why would you trust Vadic? She'll just destroy the Titan anyway. Now, here's the thing, Bob. He clearly doesn't actually know that, so he's extrapolating. But last episode, I think, did spend a ton of time convincing Beverly and Picard and us as viewers that Vadic is a fanatic, impervious to reason.
Yeah.
So he can, I think they spent time last episode making this decision make sense. And then Jack, with tears running down his face, comes clean to his parents. It's not the greatest writing in this scene. Jack, tell me how. Vadic has the bridge. Her people are everywhere. As if nobody in that room knows that these things are happening. But Jack goes, Vadic has cut off our vision. But I can still see. Oh, that's why she used those metaphors earlier. I can connect to people, see through their eyes, move through their bodies. It's all in my head. But like nice. that's the thematic. That's why she did that, I think. So yeah, his idea is he can retake the bridge, which leads to a plan. Well, first Beverly waves at like a space LED flashlight on Jack's head, thinking, as a doctor would, that it's a hallucination. But Sydney jumps in and vouches for Jack because, remember, he sort of marionetted her last episode. And Picard says, this may be why everybody wants Jack.
Yeah, this part doesn't seem very Star Trek if you think about it. It's not... Okay. I don't know. I mean, again, always thinking in my brain, how Star Trek is this moment? If they can, they have sensors and scanners and imaging technology. How is he... If Beverly has no way of seeing what's going on with Jack, no way of sort of empirically seeing something going on with his brain. It doesn't seem very Star Trek, does it? It doesn't seem very science-y.
That's why I was talking about, that's why I brought up telepathy last episode, which is Star Trek is, in my mind, science, 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 right? That's its thing. But it also allows for things like, and some species can read others' thoughts and minds.
Yeah.
And I think in its heart, it would like to be all science, but there is that sort of wiggle room. And frankly, we are going to find out what in the heck's going on, I think, pretty soon. I hope that there will be a good Star Trek-y explanation, by which I mean probably scientific. So Picard figures out why everybody's after Jack. Of course, they wouldn't know that because Jack's never told anybody. And he explains the existence of an override codex, which can re-enable the Titan's systems from the bridge. So... That's really convenient. The clock is ticking, and then there's this whole scene where the guy on the bridge nearly finishes inputting the code, and Vadic realizes that Jack's doing his thing, so it doesn't work. This is a thing they do a bunch of times, which is we have a plan, the plan doesn't work, we have to come up with a new plan. It's a very good, little roller coaster. It's not the big... It's like a bunch of small hills on a wooden roller coaster in my mind. She realizes, Vadic does, that it's Jack doing it, which... leads me to believe that she knows what the heck is going on with Jack. And she says he's finally living up to his potential. So she's basically speaking through the guy Jack has taken over right into Jack. He freaks out and says she knows. And then there's I very much enjoyed this scene where they're naming proverbial red shirts and like tying back into the other theme that I was talking about earlier about personalizing death. She tells the one guy, tell me someone who loves you. The guy has a son, but he won't give up Jack because he's Starfleet. So she's clearly going to kill him. And then she goes, nope. She walks away and she's going to clearly kill another person. And then, nope. She kills the Vulcan science officer using the disintegration phaser setting, whatever that is. But I thought it was an excellent use of misdirection. And then the 10-minute timer repeats starting now. But I really thought... I think they wanted me to think red shirt, red shirt, red shirt, and then they killed somebody who we kind of knew.
Yeah, and it does that, raising the stakes thing.
Yep. So the Rikers back on the Schriker discussing their grief because they lost a child, and there's a really neat little moment where Riker starts to spiral, thinking about their remaining child who will have lost everyone if they die. And Deanna basically emotionally slaps him out of the spiral. And then they have I don't know, I like this, a conversation that they sort of needed to have where she says, you left the house the second Jean-Luc called and put half a galaxy between us. And she said, I know you were angry at what I did when Thad died, but you gave up. He said, I didn't give up. I was numb. You know why? Because our son died, Deanna, and I needed to feel the grief. And the upshot is he didn't want to leave the grief because it was sort of the only thing he had that connected him to his son that was gone. And her reaction was to try to use her non-super scientific betazoid powers to make him feel better. But she admits her mistake. She says, look, a counselor should know better. You can't erase somebody's pain. You have to let them feel it. And he kind of didn't want to let it go. So that was their problem. It's a lot of heavy lifting in this little scene. But it emotionally, at least to me, felt like, okay, I could see how this could happen. Not that I've ever lost a child or anything, but there are a few little jabs. They're going to move away from where they lived in Picard earlier seasons. And
yeah, do you suppose that was a jab at the earlier like production design or the writers or the...
Yeah, they mocked the house and everything.
Yeah.
Look, I am predisposed to thinking that everything that is both a repudiation and a jab from earlier seasons. I don't know if they're really doing that, but God knows they were basically mocking the house that they lived in and bonding over it. And I didn't care one way or another about the house they used to like that the scouting people found to shoot in, but I was perfectly like with their pizza oven, and they made a joke about that. It was fine, but like everything feels like never mind about that crap. They're moving back to the city.
I do remember in season 1 when that episode or those episodes where they went to see the Rikers, thinking they were making the producers were making a big song and dance about how, look, this isn't your father's Next Generation, and maybe we'll see a little bit of our old friends, but not all of them, and it's not about that. And this, maybe you'll get this where they're at this house in the forest. Yep. And I was like, wow, this sucks. Like, this is not what I want to see.
Dude, we'll talk about this later, but that is that's everything that was wrong with the first 2 seasons of Picard, which was their weird allergy to Star Trek The Next Generation. And that is a perfect example of how, we'll bring them back. And like, I remember watching those scenes and being like, oh, this is so good in one sense. Like, I never thought I was going to see these guys together again. But then everything felt like everything else felt sort of wrong. So when they basically say, forget about that stuff, like they're making it, if the Rikers ever appear again, they don't have to go back to that house. That's fine with me because I'd rather forget that all happened anyway.
Yeah. Like, so imagine that, like, in the Kirk era movies, Spock never shows up in Star Trek 1. And then in like Star Trek 5, there's like a scene where they go visit him at like a library or something.
Yeah.
It would not be good.
Yes, I agree. They had a bizarre aversion to Star Trek.
Yeah.
And they thought that was a good thing. And I never did. So the guards come in after they had their little talk. And then it turns out that Worf kills the guard. He saves the day. And he uses that disintegration phaser setting that has been confusing us.
Did we see the cloak shuttle come in before that? I'm trying to remember the order of events.
It's after.
Oh, okay.
We don't see that until the next space scene. So Worf kills the bad guy changelings who's guarding them, and then gives a weird Picard-type speech, which is, Deanna, I have counted the days since I last saw you, like waves in the ocean, constant and unending.
Yeah, what was that about? I'm trying to remember. Did he do something like that earlier when he was meeting up with? Didn't he say something about Picard didn't he say something like that when he came on the Titan?
Oh yeah, he knew like the exact number of months or even maybe days. 11 years, something since he saw Picard. But this is a little bit, first of all, it's a little peek into what's going on with Worf, which I hope, they've really only got 2 episodes to explore this. I hope they're going to give us a little more about this. I used to think a few episodes ago that they were going to devote an episode entirely to Worf's backstory. I'm not sure that they have time to do that at this point. But if Worf is going to open up to somebody, anybody, it seems like the counselor he would open up to. And he says, I've thought of your empathetic gifts often during my self-evaluation.
Do you remember in season 7 of TNG, like in the last 15 minutes, they tried to make Troy and Worf a thing, but like at the very end?
Yep.
For some, I don't know what was that, just to have that subplot in the future scenes that Worf and Riker are not friendly?
Well, Parallels is season 7, episode 11. Just looked it up using the computer. That's the episode where there's the multiverse thing. Where, you know, like there's that one shot of all of those enterprises from all of the different multiverses. Red Letter Media, Mike, Drink, hates that episode because he thinks it's, these are all my friends. What does it matter? There's an infinite number of them. I never thought of it that way. And it was my first experience. What am I, maybe a freshman in high school when I saw this? And it was my first ever introduction. That's a lot of words to say. This is the first time I ever saw anything that was multiverse. So it was elevated in my mind as a holy crap. What if there are parallel realities, blah, 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 right? And it's told from Worf's perspective, Parallels is, and in some of the parallel universes he jumps into, he and Troy are a couple, and for 12 seconds for the last, 10, 12 episodes of The Next Generation, Worf and Deanna are sort of a couple, or are clearly a couple. I think that absolutely harkens back to, well, look, he says, Deanna says, well, that's wonderful, Worf. And Riker says, inappropriate.
Yeah, I didn't know where they were going with the scene, whether he was trying to, feign jealousy or just sort of sarcasm at Worf's bizarre behavior.
A little bit of both.
Probably.
Worf says, I've done the work I've done on myself, the level of sensitivity that I have achieved has been in more ways than one. And Riker says, is this a rescue mission or a continuation of the torture? Which is good. That banter, first of all, that's been the banter between Riker and Worf all season. But it also reminds me of, I would say, movie Riker, which I know is not a compliment to you, but like, think of him smiling wistfully at Zefram Cochrane going like, what are you going to do? Like, that's sort of the persona that he adopted post, in a lot of what he did post the TV series.
Yeah.
So this is where we see a shot of the Titan and the Shrike, because they're next to each other. And the ship, which has to be Worf's ship, makes a cloak jump to the vicinity of the Titan. Although why he had to jump in now, I don't know. Well, no, they had to get off of it and then maybe move around or move over. But it shouldn't have been a jump, I guess.
Well, some of the reviews I've watched, and from people who have seen all the episodes and people who follow closely, what Terry Metalis or what other people are saying, I think what's going on is something happened to Rafi's ship, and they had to take some kind of a Federation shuttle from the Titan?
Yeah.
And if you also notice,
because Worf says we have to get back to the shuttle. You're right.
And also it's cloaked. And the Titan does not cloak again until Worf shows back up. So it looks, and this is one of these problems with the storytelling, especially last episode, which I said is more confusing than mysteriously enticing. Yeah. I think they took the cloaking device. Worf took the cloaking device, and he's now brought it back.
And they just didn't. They're usually often more careful.
They didn't really explain that very well. No. So back on the Titan, Jack wants to turn himself over still, and it turns out that the good guys who are hiding from Vadic and her crew on the bridge, and I guess the crew of changelings sweeping the ship to find them. But Sydney LaForge says that she's tried everything to regain control of even just one system, and she could do it in a year, and her amazing father could do it in a month. But in minutes, no. And then she says, and I quote, "We need an asynchronous AI matrix capable of computational speeds beyond 90 trillion operations per second." And I thought, oh, this is the Q scene in every James Bond movie where he gives him an exploding lighter, a pen with a laser beam in it, and a HomePod that is actually some sort of teleportation device. Like, as it turns out, I'll be darned, we have exactly what we need. And
And that means that they got to go to Geordi, and that Geordi has to do the thing that they spend all last episode not wanting to do, which is removing the partition. We basically got very strong lore on one side of this golem's brain, and a very strong, or a less strong, I guess, Data on the other side. And the partition, it seems to be the only thing that's keeping Data alive. And then we go to there is no choice. They're pretty good at doing this most of the time, which is saying like, well, if we got to get them to do something that we said we shouldn't do, why do we take the next step and have them do it? And the answer is, well, they're out of options, right? Yeah. It's convenient, but they're out of options. And then we enter the blue-white void, which is where Data and Lore talk and exchange memorabilia from the next generation. There's Holmes's deerstalker hat. There's Holmes's pipe, and the partition lifts. And I mean, to no one's great surprise, I think, Lore wants to destroy. He says, "I'm overpowering you, brother, as I always could. One life form replacing another. Evolution, my dear Watson." And Data sort of wants to interrogate the memories that he's having. He says, Holmes collected nothing, neither trinkets nor thoughts, which were not specifically significant to him. Well, I mean, basically, while Data's dying, he's reminiscing, and Lore's like, reminiscing, are we? Scanning through your meaningless memorabilia? In my mind, you would find mightier things, symbols of power, conquest. This tracks, Bob, with the lore that we know, I think. And then he says, the only sensible measure of the success of a life, while you collect trinkets. So that's Lore and sort of Data doing their thing. That's not in the least bit surprising to me. The blue-white void reminds me of that, remember that TNG episode? I think I have this right, where Picard was like hanging out in a white void with Q while he was dying in the real world.
Yeah. Or his heart surgery or whatever, yeah.
Because he got stabbed when he was young and he had the thing. But yeah, anyway, this is the Domjot, play Domjot, human.
A Nausicaan.
Oh, the Nausicaans were the Domjot players. Yeah, anyway, it reminded me a little of, I would guess they were thinking of that sort of episode when they designed this. Although, I guess to be fair, 1 trillion pieces of media have put people dying or living inside of white void, so it's not doesn't have to be that.
Wasn't there like a white room in Angel, Wolfram Hart or something?
Oh, it was the powers that be were in a sort of white room. Yeah, cool. You're right.
Look at that.
You're so good. They were watching Angel. This, I feel like, you know why I liked this so much? I feel like this is the show. This is what I was alluding to earlier. This is the show justifying its link to the past. Like, Data is like, all of these things are my memories, and they make me, and they're what matter. And Lore's like, who cares about that? Like, where's your trophies? Basically. Yeah. And Data's like, you know, it's not about symbols of power and conquest. It's about things that make me me. And so much, we talked about this earlier, so much of Star Trek Picard seasons 1 or 2 was just so against the idea of looking back and only looking forward. And that seems ridiculous to me as a premise of a series that is in fact itself a sequel. I love this scene because my read on it is basically that they're saying it's okay to fondly remember Data as Holmes, but you don't have to do Data as Holmes again necessarily, but linking back to that is what helps you move forward. There's no problem with that. We don't just, as you've had to say before, as you've said before, we don't just have to replay the hits, but we can evolve using what we had before. Like, proper evolution brings the past forward, although Lore thinks that evolution is about destroying. But you don't have to destroy everything to become something new and different. And I just thought, you know, that's the best of this. That's the sort of ethos of this series that makes it feel like Star Trek.
Yeah, I don't know that it quite made sense to me. It was pretty obvious, you know, Data had some sort of... I mean, look, we all knew Data was going to win out over Lore.
I have been fooled before in this season thinking people might die. I was not for 1 nanosecond worried that Data wasn't actually doing something. They made him, there are a lot of cuts back to like, oh, we need your help, old friend, fight. And I was like, this is a rope-a-dope, and I'm not like cynically thinking that, but they already killed Data. They were not going to do that again.
Yeah,
they were making right the wrong.
And I even though I think it doesn't make sense, I sort of figured out where, like, okay, he's giving Lore everything. He's giving him memories so that then his Lore become Data. So I sort of figured he was going to say something like that. And I was watching with Tracy and Will, and Tracy, right? Tracy's always trying to act like she knows where something's going or guess about this, and she's like, oh, this is how Data wins. One of those things.
Sure,
which is fine. Yeah.
I didn't think it was bad. I really didn't. I just didn't buy in. They were trying to create drama, and there have to be stakes and consequences. I just didn't think for a second. I have understood on some fundamental level that what was going to happen is neither Data nor Lore, although very much closer to Data than Lore, was going to emerge, but some hybrid between the two.
Well, and I forget who it was. It was some German philosopher who wrote, not German, Jesus, Greek philosopher who, talked a lot about drama. And I always confuse whether it's Plato or Aristotle. But he said that the resolution has to be both surprising yet inevitable. Mm-hmm. So think like, Han Solo shows up at the last minute. You forgot about him. But he shows up at the last minute, and he saves the day, and then Luke uses the Force, and they blow up the Death Star. Yeah. Now, those things, once they happen, you go, oh, of course they were going to do that. But if you're doing the story well, it should be surprising. Mm-hmm. There was a moment in the new Top Gun, which I enjoyed a great deal, where the one hotshot fighter dude's sitting on the carrier, and he's like, when do I get to go up there, guys? When do I get to take off? And they keep saying, no, stay on the deck. And then, of course, at the very end, he's the guy who comes in and saves the day. But if they have done their job correctly, at the moment it happens, you have forgotten that he was going to do that.
Yes.
So this Data Lore thing, it was inevitable. We all knew, we could see it coming a million miles away, but it wasn't really surprising.
Yep. The only question was how they were going to get there, and they tried to make it. They did their best, but it's just no. So we wind up back on the Shrike. Rafi joins the crew, and they're looking at Picard's body. And what we find out is that, well, we already knew this is what the changelings really wanted from Daystrom Station. But it's not the body. We learned a little bit about this last episode. It's not Picard's body they wanted, but what it contained.
His brain? Part of his brain?
They removed portions of his brain, is what Rafi says. Sections that were infected with Irumodic syndrome. And Riker says, why the hell would they want that? And I have no idea. Rafi's going to download, well, actually she does download the database to find out. And there's a little moment where Rafi and Deanna Troi meet, and they figure out that Vadic has the Titan. So we go back to the Titan. Vadic is very angry, thinks it's time to kill again. And then who comes up the turbo lift but Jack? Now, Bob, remember earlier in this episode where Shaw was like, you should have blown the turbo lift, you ding-dong. There are consequences to actions. And she's like, I was going to save you. And we don't know what the consequences to actions were. And then who shows up and how on the turbo lift but Jack? You get it? Mm-hmm. You see that? I didn't write that down. I figured that out while I was recapping the episode just now. So there it is. There's the tie to later. It turns out that he's holding a thermal detonator.
It did look exactly like that. That was exactly what I thought.
Yeah, I at first thought this is probably not Jack, right? Like he made himself into a changeling, and then he turned into himself. It's like 3 levels of Inception deep, but turns out that's not true. We go back to the blue-white void, and then the Titan, and we're like jumping around. And Geordi's building the tension by saying Lore's matrix is growing. In other words, he's winning, and he's overriding Data, and everybody's sad, except for me, because I don't think for half a second that's actually going to happen. But they're all lines. I don't know. It's a little bit paint by numbers. You have to do this. You have to build tension. You have to make the stakes here. Lore monologue saying he's consuming Data, and that Data will just simply cease to be, and all of the memories go with you. That will simply fade away. And Data says, my memories define me. I am who I am because they exist. Even though I do not share your desire to dominate, I recognize, given my current state, I am powerless to stop you. Horse apples, But again, read this as about the Next Generation and the Picard television show. This is entirely, in my reading, a repudiation of those first 2 seasons that tried so hard to distance themselves from the source material. They were essentially allergic to memories of Star Trek. This show is not. Lord takes something out of Data's hands. It's a Tasha Yar hologram. Remember her? Remember that one episode where they where we found, it was season 1, where all the ladies got horny, and then Tasha Yar showed up at his room, and the implication is they were banging. That was a weird thing.
Yeah, he's fully functional. He's programmed with a broad variety of pleasuring techniques or something like that.
Okay, well, it's good to know.
But you know what's weird is, don't you frequently see Data when he's nude and he just sort of has the Ken doll crotch?
I don't think so. That might be your headcanon.
Okay, all right, sorry. Okay, all right.
So now Jack's on the bridge. They're cutting back and forth. And Jack says, look, just let everybody go or I'll blow myself up and you'll die and your mission will fail. She locks the prisoners who are on the bridge into the conference room, but Seven runs out at the last second. And Vadic says to her, how fitting it is for you to stay and witness this, which is a weird line. And we'll talk about this in the speculation segment, but I'm guessing it has something to do with what you were talking about. So Vadic goes to Jack. What was it like roaming from planet to planet, species to species, but never able to outrun that awful, constant shadow of isolation, loneliness, a life in service to others, a calling? Or was it guilt? Did you always know deep, deep down what you are? And, as the resident old man against, you know what? I think they're just breaking down my defenses with the Star Trek swearing, but at least this comes out of the mouth of a Han Solo type character who says, look, Vadic, if at any point you want to stop talking in batshit circles, I'm all ears. It's a good line, frankly, and it's something he would say.
It's a little, it's a little Marvel-esque, little Whedon-esque.
We get a little bit of that too. Vadic says that she can help Jack understand, which I think means that she knows what's going on. She knows about the voices in her head. She knows about the red door, which we've seen many, many times. Back in the Void, Data shows Lore playing cards. Again, the metaphor is memories of TNG. Not to put too fine a point on it, but I'm going to put the finest of points on it, frankly. And Data's showing compassion. Lore's like, why are you giving me these things? And Data says, because you have had nothing while I have had everything, which is, by the way, true and kind of nice. Spot shows up. That's nice. Remember Spot, the cat?
I do. He looks very similar to a beloved cat, Kosh, when I was a young man, and also a current Cash I have, Reginald T. Cat. Do you know what the T stands for?
The?
Very good. Reginald the Cat, Reggie.
So what happens is, what the least surprising moment maybe in the episode, which is Data had to sacrifice himself to make the merge happen. He knew that, and we knew that. We talked about that. But Lore is the only one in the series who seems to be confused about it, or at least at this moment.
It's
I guess
like
everybody else is too.
Yeah, it's like he's never seen Star Trek.
It's true. Data says, I merely discovered the error in your deception, that my memories were not without value to you. I knew, because they belonged to me, that you would see them as trophies and be unable to resist them. You took the things that were me, and in doing so, you have become me. We are one. We are me. And there's a nice little moment where they hug and say goodbye, brother, to each other. They gave Laura a death scene, which I didn't see coming exactly, and it was nice. He was just as he was a jerk, but he was just as alive as Mr. Data. So
it was fine. I don't think it quite made any sense. Yeah. I mean, we knew where they were going. It's like, well, wait, I'm sacrificing myself, but then I gave you all my stuff, and then that makes you both of us, and then that makes you dead. Like, okay, whatever.
They have them hugging. The worst part about this scene, Bob, is that they have them hugging, and the stand-in for Brent Spiner had the world's worst white wig I have ever seen from behind. It's awful.
See, that did not bump me, which means perhaps I was more invested in this.
Oh, good.
Than you, young David.
Oh, okay. Well, look, they merge and Data comes back, and I don't care about the wig. I was covered. head to toe in goosebumps. Data addresses the ship jauntily. He's making some jokes.
Say no more, Captain.
That's it. Riker and the crew, they dock on the Titan. Rafi stands in the hallway, capital T, capital H. They do love that hallway set, as you pointed out. But if you're going to love a set, you might as well love that one because it's still great. They had to give her something to do, and her job was to fight changelings with knives?
Yeah, she goes a little, everybody's a wire fu ninja.
Sure, why not? Jack deploys a shield. It turns out it wasn't a thermal detonator. And Picard orders the evacuation hatch open. And Seven steps out of Picard and into an action movie and says, "Get off my bridge." And that sucks all of the changelings out of the bridge.
You're fired.
There you go. And Vadic has one last line. She says, "Fucking solids." And then she gets sucked out into space. There was a moment as she's floating and freezing where I'm doing like the math, like, okay, well, we saw changelings get poked around by the scientists, and does freezing kill them, and blah, blah, blah. And then she's floating toward the Shrike, and I'm thinking, oh, don't tell me she's going to accidentally like float into the dock and live or something. But no, she just shatters into a bajillion pieces.
Yeah, but even that I feel is a little confusing because she's a changeling. So like, can't they, just like the T-2000 or whatever, can't you just...
Yes, I would say yes, except Shaw comes out of the conference room being awesome, sits down in the captain's chair being awesome, says, "Seven, you do the orders." They fire and blow up the Shrike. So I feel like they left a bit of like, oh, can she reconstitute? But then they blew up the Shrike and she was floating around there. So I guess the window is still open in some way. I don't know. They seem to have maybe kept changelings alive in a beaker. But I think if they decide she's dead,
seems unlikely.
Those two things in combination.
Yeah.
Worf and Rafi have a moment of sort of teaching inside of that hallway set where he's Yoda to her.
You're leading with your shoulder.
Right. She's like, give me a friggin' break. But it's pretty good. I like that. I feel like we've pretty much at this point wrapped up the overriding tension that Seven and Shaw had. Earlier in the episode, I don't think I mentioned it, unless she's about to do that. She says, like, he calls her Hanson, and she says, "My name is Seven." So she's standing up to him, right, at that point, not just taking orders. And then by the end of the episode, he's like, remember, by episode 1 or 2, she was confined to quarters, for crying out loud. They were on the outs, and he gives her, there's the arc, right? By the end, he's like, "Oh, you did well. You can give the order to blow up the Shrike." So it's a nice, I think we can mostly dispense with that. I mean, on his best day, Shaw's going to be half a jerk, a wonderful half a jerk. But I don't think they have to work through that anymore.
Although none of this would have happened if Seven had just not commandeered the ship and gone.
It's also true.
Explicitly where Shaw said, "Don't go."
Mm-hmm. But it turns out, she actually did some crappy things that turned out pretty good because they would have never known about Starfleet being taken over.
Probably,
I guess is what we're going to go with.
They probably would have been like replaced while they were getting in the shower or something.
Why getting in the shower?
I don't know. They're just, hey, but gonna have a salad. Then boom. Changeling kills them.
Shower salad.
Yeah.
Deanna swoons in that hallway. She says there's a darkness on the ship. All-consuming darkness.
There's a darkness.
It's true. There's a darkness upon me. It's covered in light.
What does your heart tell you?
Yes, I guess. Maybe. Data is old.
The world is changing.
He's got like a stiff neck. Data says to Geordi, "I am still Data, but also Lore, B4, and all that Dr. Soong programmed into this body." So that includes, we know, Lal and Dr. Soong. He said they ask, I think Geordi says, "How do you feel?" And he says, "I feel," with tears in his eyes. I mean, that is, I got to say, the arc of other Data in Picard season 1 was kill me. I've lived long enough in this void and I'm bored. This is so much. You put one on one side of the scale and the other on the other side. And the one from season 1 shoots out into space because the weight differential is so different. It's not even close. This is the culmination of everything since episode 1 of Star Trek: The Next Generation on TV, which is nice. It's neat. And look, let's just, as you said before, just hand wave over. It's theoretically everything, but let's be clear, it's actually really Data with a slight with some evolution, right?
Yeah.
And it's nice to see, look, there are moments like this in this episode where you see Geordi LaForge and Data standing together in a hallway, and like I didn't lose any sleep over this, Bob, but like I never thought this was going to happen. Here's a scene that somebody wrote where these two friends come back together, and I just didn't think that was in the cards for a long time, because I thought Star Trek ended, The Next Generation ended on a bummer, and they got to do this, and they didn't completely mess it up, and that was nice. And speaking of things I never thought I'd see again, we wind up in the conference room, and every principal actor from Star Trek: The Next Generation is sitting there in the same room around a conference table with purple chairs. Riker mentions Data's upgrades, and he says, here's how he explains himself. I'm mostly myself, I assure you, albeit with a dash of computational joie de vivre, which is, I think he's saying he's happy to be alive, and his personality is going to show that, like he did when he was talking over the loudspeakers to Vadic. Makes sense to me. And then they dispatch with Picard season 1. I appreciate them coming in to say this, but I'm going to tell you what they mean and then tell you what they said. What they mean is never mind. Don't worry about that. Picard says, the last time we spoke, you wished to experience death, and as happy as I am that you're here, I hope that we haven't betrayed that wish. And Data says, no, sir. I know that me is resting peacefully, but this me would rather be no place else in the universe. So they sit around a conference table for the first time, in 20 some years. If I learned anything from Joss Whedon stuff, specifically Angel, it's that happiness leads to sadness. You want to get everybody feeling really good right before you pull the rug out underneath them. They may or may not do this, but what that did in this moment was go like, hey, appreciate this. This is not a bunch of people not acting like themselves. They just comfortably fit back into the role and sat around a table. And I didn't think I was going to see this, and this was awfully nice.
Yeah, it was very, very, it was great. You could tell that this was the episode where they're all getting back together. They finally got the band back together.
They surely did. They're going to play some jazz. Riker says they're analyzing the data. Should I say data for the computer stuff and data for the man?
I don't want to break this to you, and maybe we can record some corrections, but you have called data like 14 times today.
Good. Excellent. I'm not going back and doing that. That's just my dump going through. Just like plebeians. They're still analyzing the data from the Shrike. Data points out the emotional truth that will be a part of the answer, which is nice because he can do that stuff now because he feels. Deanna backs him up. She says, there's a darkness with that boy, talking about Jack. Not in him, but around him or passing through him. And a voice inside him, ancient and weak, but a voice that isn't his own. I think it's time I met your son, and now the Titan cloaks. And the end is a counseling scene, which I think is a pretty good use of Deanna's powers. It was a weird thing from the beginning to put a counselor, I would argue, on the bridge of the USS Enterprise. It was probably a mid-'80s zeitgeist thing to do it.
Super 1986, yeah.
Right? But that's what they did, and I would say it's fair to say they struggled to figure out how to use her beyond somebody's talking on the view screen, clearly angry, and then Troy says he's angry. Deanna says so they're sitting down in a sort of counseling session, and Deanna says to Jack, the quickest path to the truth is the one everybody needs right now. And I thought, God, yes, the everybody is me. Finally, we're going to get there. They join hands. Deanna leads. There's the red door, the talking door. He says he's terrified of opening it. He resists. And then suddenly they're standing in the hallway, that hallway set where the red door happens to be. Light shines through the keyhole. Jack grabs the handle, cut to black. A disembodied woman's voice says, Jack, roll credits. Next episode, I guess.
The reviewer that I was watching, who has seen all 10 episodes before the first episode aired, he speculated, in his opinion, it would have been better if we would have seen a shot of what was behind the door before they smash cut to credits.
Okay. Well, I mean, I feel like I feel about this episode very similarly to the way I felt before. I think, look, we're 8 out of 10 episodes into Picard. I think the first 4 episodes were nearly perfect. They were basically a Star Trek The Next Generation movie, but good. And then we moved into the last 3 episodes. So those are the episodes that went from like, get Picard out of the vineyard and start to assemble the team. And then the last episodes, what's it, 6, 7, and 8, I guess, have been, I think you've infected my brain. There's sort of lots of air to fill in these episodes.
Oh, yeah.
3 episodes in a row where we're in tense ship situations. And, you know, they probably had a 10-episode order, figured out the beats, and then it feels like these were stretched. None of them were bad, I thought, you know, overtly bad, but the quality between, if I'm going Act 1 is 1 through 4, Act 2 is 6, 7, and 8, and Act 3 is 9 and 10, Act 1 wins hands down over Act 2. And you know, it was interesting. Now I think that we're really at the end of Act 2. I'm going to assume that that's where we are and proceed on that premise. Look, what can I say? I liked it a little bit less. I liked it less than the first act. I think it had a point. Now looking back on it, like I burned 1 million calories saying Picard is a diplomat, and other seasons of Picard and movies didn't treat him like a diplomat, and then he walked around acting like a diplomat. But the theme of episodes 6, 7, and 8 were basically, yeah, but what happens when diplomacy fails? And like, what does the good guy do? You know? And I think that's why we spent so much time, or they spent so much time talking about like losing their moral compass last episode, right? Like the answer is, in the end, he fights. He almost makes a really weird and, you know, maybe bad decision analogous to what Section 31 did, creating the changeling virus. But the question was, when reason fails you, more or less, do you lose your way, or do you make a virus, or do your principles guide you, or whatever? And I think by the end of this, they did the right thing. But I think thematically, that's the best I've got for that middle act. And now with Vadic dispatched, I feel like the next 2 episodes have to wrap the story up, right? Like, if part 1 was who is this? How do I do this? Part 2 is maybe what do we do with this? And part 3 is, oh, this is what it is. Now we got to do something.
Yeah, apparently 9 answers the questions and 10 is the grand finale.
There you go. So I guess probably Frontier Day is episode 10. But I am eager. Once again, good cliffhanger. Last episode they said we'd find out who Jack was, but they didn't do that this episode. Kind of filler, but not bad filler, but filler. So there you go. You want to do the speculation segment?
Let's do it. Sound the spoiler horn.
The rule is, if I figure something out from careful watching of an episode, then that's fine. If the show is foreshadowing and I pick that up, it's cool. Is it Borg stuff?
I was really getting a Borg vibe from the sort of Jack vision. It looked a lot like First Contact. Now, that could be intentional to sort of throw you off. It could just be how they're doing that effect of, like, you know, Jack vision. Mm-hmm. But it definitely does seem like First Contact shots. Yeah,
and I feel like my friend Sean, hi Sean, mentioned, sort of planted this seed in my head last week, but like, it's not inconceivable to think that, I don't know, that floating head could be Borg queenish. The Borg could think that Jack was the collective's baby too. And I mean, the thing that really made me go like, oh, they're really telegraphing this, is why would Vadic say it's fitting for Seven to be there and witness whatever happens?
Well, that, and wasn't there something about wasn't Troy saying something that sounded like referring to a collective?
Yeah. Did she? Oh, no.
I thought there was something referring to like many voices, something like that.
The voices. You've heard them, the voices. plural. Yeah. Part of me wants to be slightly disappointed if they go the Borg angle, because there was a tendency to make everything post not all good things.
Yeah.
What's the Borg one?
Post Best of Both Worlds.
Thank you. Best of Both Worlds. Borgy, because they're the best enemy ever.
It was the big hit, yeah.
Yeah. But it's also kind of a well you don't need to dip back into every time.
And they just did the Borg last season.
Yep.
I don't know. The guy who I was watching who's seen the last 2 episodes said he hasn't seen anybody guess what's fully going on in the last episode, but he thinks some people have gotten close. There's a lot of in hindsight, there is a lot of First Contact music. The end credits are, I believe, directly from, I don't even think it's re-recorded. I just think it's re-edited from the actual score of First Contact. There was the opening fanfare when it says Star Trek Picard, the part you put in our own podcast. I think the first half is also from the First Contact score. Then that second little flute thing, I think, was from seasons 1 and 2 of Picard. And I even think, and I thought this before I was even thinking of Borg, I think there was another First Contact cue soundtrack at the end of this episode too, just a part of the soundtrack. So that's a lot. It could just be a coincidence because that's sort of nostalgic TNG movie, but that's kind of a lot.
It certainly feels like they're going that way. My guess is, I don't have any specific guesses. However, it does seem to me that, well, if I had to guess based on thematic stuff, we've talked about it before. This is a mostly Next Generation thing, but it's really also a 90s Star Trek thing. So I don't think, even if they do the Borg, even if the Borg is part of this, I think they're gonna mix and match, right? I don't know what else that means, but it's not just the changelings. Look, the changelings weren't from the Next Generation, right? They brought that in. So I think it's probably my guess is a clever remix.
Is it, Picard's brain, the syndrome they said he had?
Yeah.
Also, he fathered a child, ostensibly, and all this stuff happened after he was assimilated.
Right.
So maybe there is something biologically connected to the Borg.
Right. The syndrome, it'd be interesting to know if there was a bot. You could always discard it if it, just toss it out even if it existed. But I wondered if they just gave him the disease as a plot point in All Good Things, Ironic Syndrome, right? And somebody said, well, we'll resurrect that for the television show. Maybe there was a plan at some point that Ironic Syndrome was not, in fact, that, but in fact, some vestige from, having been Borg at one point.
Yeah.
Who knows? As I've
Jack
said before,
could be the offspring of a,
sure,
partially Borg modified father.
Right. Like, what happens when the Borg reproduce? Do we know? Is that a thing? They just assimilate. They do not. Right?
I'm sure it's come up in some episode at some point.
Well, certainly that I wouldn't know, and I don't want to research it. But I'll bet you it's a mixtape of all of the canonical 90s era Star Trek comes together, and they figured out a clever way to sort of cross these things. So yeah, it'll be interesting. We're going to get, it doesn't surprise me at all to know that next episode is answers and then the last episode is action. And I'm looking forward to it. The only thing I don't like is that there's only 2 more weeks of this. Because
we do know, it's sad. Metalis keeps sort of referencing Star Trek 6. There's the great final battle with the Enterprise A and the Excelsior. It's possible, I don't know, maybe we get something like that. Maybe the Titan is the Excelsior and everyone seems to think we're going to get a Galaxy class. Maybe it's the Titan and the Enterprise D fighting side by side.
Yeah. I imagine, like I said in a previous speculation segment, I don't think it is. Here's my guess. I think it is way too late to stop the plot. They just have to foil it as it's happening, which means they have to do it on Frontier Day. And they already established this is the exact sort of thing you were talking about earlier in this episode, which is, well, they have set up that all current model Starfleet ships can find all other ones. And thus they have established that they've pushed them into old ships.
Yeah.
So that gives we got to get on the Enterprise or Geordi says, "Oh, well, you didn't see the Enterprise because we were still working on it, and it's inside, the D or whatever, something like that." I do not care. I just want to see it. Janeway's going to be. They're going to bust her out and put her on Voyager. There's going to be an awful lot. I don't know. I don't know what the details are, but I would be at this point, as I've probably said before, shocked if it doesn't happen. Genuinely surprised if that's not what they're going for.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited. It's going to be hard on Thursday next week to not wait for the evening, as is our ritual at this point.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I mean, of course they could screw it up, but they've done so well thus far. I have no expectation that they really will. The worst thing about this season was the moral equivalence they were drawing between the Starfleet and the Changelings. But I mean, if that's the worst it gets, I can live with it. Considering how, especially in the context of the actual real world we live in, where people who didn't particularly care for Star Trek seem to have overtaken Star Trek for several years. It's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have to agree with everything.
Have you been following the hashtag Fate of the Plate?
No. What is that?
Mike and Rich of Red Letter Media. Mike has a decorative Franklin Mint Star Trek plate.
Oh, good.
And if they stick the landing, if they don't stick the landing, like every other, new Trek schlock, Mike destroys the plate. If they do stick the landing,
I've been avoiding watching the latest review.
Yes, and this is in that one. If they do stick the landing, and it's a great show from top to bottom, Rich has to eat off the plate. However, the plate specifically asks on the back of the plate, please don't eat food off of this plate.
Good.
It'll give you cancer or something. So hopefully Rich has to have a cancer dinner.
Hopefully.
Fate of the plate.
Hashtag Fate of the Plate. Got it.
That's it.
All right. Well, I'll see you back here next week for the second to last episode. Until then, as we always say at the end of each episode, go ahead, Bob.
Mahalo.